So yes, it's the disses and rap battles of the 13th century Iberian Peninsula. And so here we go. This is just a general outline. The slander and libel and defamation laws, these have to feature because the penalties were so stiff. How these and how they were avoided, the poetics of insults, the types, the two larger categories of the Cantigas, the Escarino, scorn, and Maldizer, bad talking, the poetic record and the sources, and then the second half of the class, composing your own if you care to or dare to. So what we have here, okay, so let me put this in here. Put this in here. Here we go. Alfonso X, called the Learned, codified Castilian law and what would later be called las siete partidas, the seven divisions. These laws were written roughly between 1251 and 1265. Partida 7, Title 9, Law 1 forbids a man insulting another or giving voice before many, fashioning scorn or giving a bad name. That's my translation. The partidas considered slanderous verbal insults less serious than libelous ones. And if those accusations were proven true, then there was no penalty. If the thing that you were talking about turned out to be true, there was no penalty. However, catchy songs or rhymes were treated on the same level as written libel because the bad that men say about each other in writing or in rhyme is worse because the memory of those endures forever. Since the defamation could potentially be remembered for a long time, composing and performing an insulting cantiga or canción could be a potentially serious offense. And how serious was the penalty? There were 7 possible punishments for injuria, for injuring another through slander or libel. They ranged from execution or loss of a limb to, on the one end, to being stripped naked in public, covered in honey, and left out in the sun for the flies to eat for 1 hour. I mean, that's bad enough. The penalties in between, the sentences in between, all had to do with either life in chains or life in slavery or a predetermined indentured period to the injured party. But those, from the one end to the other, these were serious. They were not playing around. Slander and libel laws protected men as well as virgins, married women, and widows who live honestly. That's my translation of what I looked up. And this is from the Cantigas de Santa Maria. Looks like somebody's about ready. I'm not sure which this one is from, but it looks like someone's about to be sentenced here. That's why I included it. And so, yet before and while these laws were being written, there was a genre of troubadour poetry with an extensive body of work found among these poets from the border with Occitania to the east, to Galicia and Portugal in the west. These songs traveled with those who wrote and or performed them. In Galician Portuguese, I do not know how to pronounce Galician Portuguese competently, so I don't want to butcher it, but Castilian is close. In Castilian verse, these were called Cantigas de Escarino e Maldizer. These translate roughly to songs of scorn and ridicule or songs of mockery and vilification. So this likely started at the university. It doesn't surprise me. University students were already honing their skills in the art of disputation. It isn't much of a stretch to see how they would begin to compose poetic jokes and comic debates. Tenzones are poetic debates, and some would be comical. The insulting and the insulted are connected in invective poetry, and this keeps the words from coming to blows. The poet shows his verbal dexterity and wit against another poet. These poems weren't just jokes, but poems of intention, because they took aim at specific targets, delivering only symbolic blows. Once the students graduated, troubadour poets of noble birth did not, as a rule, perform their own works, but they hired professional performers, joglares in Castilian, who were either attached to their courts or freelancers. These poems were written in Galician Portuguese, and many trovadores had come to the court of Alfonso X of Castilla from Portugal after they had picked the losing side of a political upheaval there. So how the strict penalties of the libel laws were avoided. Alfonso X's Siete Partidas considered that these verbal games were happening. He himself had taken part in them in his younger years, so his laws defined when and in what manner this verbal play was permitted. The joke had to be told so that all the participants, the teller, the audience, and the butt of the joke laughed and took pleasure in its telling. So the target had to be there. The target had to be present. The legal text goes on to say, moreover, the one who tells the joke must know how to laugh in the appropriate place, for otherwise it would not be a game. For this reason, the ancient proverb says there is no game when someone does not laugh, which means the events that these things took place in were relatively closed events, like a festival or a victory party. You couldn't just start to say something like this out, say some of these poems out in the middle of the town square, because you could be facing those serious penalties. The poets had to compose carefully, since the target of the insult must not take offense, but enjoy them as part of the game of playful jesting. The target must be able to take the joke. The law addresses Escarino as an art form, allowing poets to display their wit and skill while shying away from anything potentially uncomfortable. Now, there are exceptions, and I will be more than happy to point them out when we get to it. Despite how close they would come to falling under the category of libel or slander, with all the penalties implied, these poems were often performed of and even by the king himself at festive events. These were attacks of high intellectual quality with the specific goal of amusing and impressing poetically literate circles and winning the patronage of the king. The poetics of insults, Cantigas de Escarino and Maldizer. There were two distinct types of insult or joke poetry, but they were not mutually exclusive and were often combined. The Cantigas de Escarino and the Cantigas de Maldizer. The poetic debate, the tenzón, would also fall under either general category, a debate of mockery or vilification. There's no one set form to these cantigas. They vary in their meters, their lengths, their rhyme schemes, and the targets for skewering. The biggest advice I can give is look for dual language collections to get an idea of the rhyme schemes at play. The meters are largely pentameter or heptameter, though 8-syllable 4-beat ditties were also common. The lengths can range from 3 to 15 stanzas with or without a 3-line envoy. The stanzas can contain 3, 5, 6, or 7 lines and may have 1, 2, or 3-line refrains at the end of each stanza. And these were 3 sample rhyme schemes. The song about a master woodwright, the song about a lost pilgrimage, and the song about the dean's books. These 2 on either end were written by Alfonso X. He was a busy boy when he was younger. You notice that the rhyme schemes are rather simple and catchy for 2 out of the 3. Here with the song about the dean's books, Alfonso is showing off. Alfonso is definitely showing off. He's telling a story here, and he's telling a story, and he's just basically showing off how many rhymes he can come up with. So get to the next one. So now we're going to talk about general topics, the general topics that were there to be skewered. The lampooning of pilgrimage. And this is not an exhaustive list. These were 6 that showed up the most often. Pilgrimage is usually undertaken as a sincere act of devotion or of penance, or to fulfill a vow, or to cure a disease. Please, I'll go on pilgrimage if you would take this from me, or from my wife, or whoever. The burlesque, the insincere pilgrimage is primarily a trip of business or pleasure, preferably the two combined, especially if the business is shady. The pilgrims in these cantigas are thieves, beggars, merchants, and especially soldaderas, performers, courtesans, or prostitutes. One merchant on his way to Jerusalem made it as far as Montpellier, traded his merchandise, but all he brought back in exchange were damaged goods and a case of the mal français. One pilgrim pointed out by name in 6 separate cantigas was a joglar, a performer of low social standing, named Pero Garcia d'Ambroa. According to these songs, he never made the harsh journey overseas, but took the more comfortable Camino Frances to Montpellier, stayed there for the duration of the time the trip to Jerusalem would have taken, lied about having gone, inventing tales of storms at sea, and giving generic details about it, about the Passion of Christ performed in Jerusalem, as if he'd actually seen it. A friend and rival performer, Pedro Amigo de Sevilla, ironically comments that if he were to go to Outremer, he too would only go as far as Montpellier. And why even go that far? He could stay right at home to the same effect. And so this image here is from the Cantiga de Santa Maria 35. It's a devotional song about a different pilgrimage subject. Cantigas de Escarino and Maldizer have few illuminations, as performance for entertainment and those for devotion are two very different things and are treated accordingly. The above is a translated fragment from a cantiga by another rival joglar, Pero Gomez Barroso. If someone wants to read it, if someone would like to read it, please do.
Sure. Pero d'Ambroa, God forgive me. I did not make fun of you concerning the land across the sea, and this is why. Because I could find nothing in it to make fun of, since you never went there. And I don't know how to make fun of you over a place where you've never been.
Exactly. And so there were 6 cantigas. The guy was a target, right for skewering, but later on I'll be showing where he could dish it out as well as take it. So the next topic for skewering: lascivious nuns and priests, corrupt, hypocritical church officials, lazy and avaricious noblemen, and those who abuse their power. Few subjects deserve more scorn than the religious or authority figure that tells his or her parishioners or constituents to behave one way while they themselves behave in another. One of the most well-known cantigas profanas, as opposed to cantigas sagradas, written by Alfonso X, is what has been called his song about the Dean of Cadiz's books. Scholars have pondered the identity of the learned Dean of Cadiz. Alfonso retook Cadiz from the Moorish control in 1262. In 1264, Cadiz's dean, a senior church official ranking below a bishop, was Juan Ruiz Diaz. He was a royal official who carried out the redistribution of houses and land after Alfonso retook the city of Jerez from the Moors in the province of Cadiz in 1264. 3 years later, there were fiscal problems in the church administration of Cadiz. That may have motivated Alfonso to ridicule Ruiz Diaz as a scholar devoted to illicit sex. And so I'm going to the next slide. This is the reason why this class is PG-13, practically R. No one under 18, please. If you search for Alfonso X and Song of the Dean's books, you will get all manner of translations, some tamer than others. This one is a rather candid one. Song about the Dean's books. And if someone wants to read it, It will go from here to here, then here, then here, and then there's one more panel in the next slide. But if someone wishes to read that one. And again, if I will say in advance, yes, these are adult themes, and the language is, and this is actually one of this is one of the more candid ones. There's actually one even more so than this. This is the one slightly scaled back. But
I'm willing to do it, but I don't want to step on if anybody else would like to have
I had to read it to prepare myself.
Okay, go ahead.
It's like, let me see what I'm getting myself into first.
There will be the F-bomb dropped here and there.
only a couple times.
Yeah.
I met a man carrying books from Berger to Cadiz Dean. And when I asked to take a look, he said, "Sir, the 2 books you see and the others the dean has, just like these, allow him to fuck as much as he pleases." And that is not all. In spite of having to read and study canon law, with books like these, the Dean of Cadiz puts the women he fucks in thrall, so much so that they end up seeing cranes as crows and silkworms as eels. When it comes to the art of fucking, his books have all you need to know, and he does absolutely nothing but read them day and night. And so, when it comes to fucking, he's a master, and he fucks every Moorish dame he's after. There are things that he can do with these books like no one else. He leaves them open while he screws, and should some women be possessed, he fucks her with such skill and art, the evil demon soon departs.
One more verse.
Okay.
And there we go.
With his books, this clever dean can even cure St. Marcoul's fire. If a woman has this disease, by his fucking, he can charm her until the fire begins to seem merely snow or frost or sleet.
And this last verse, thank you very much for that, Anna. Thank you very much. This last verse is not from the same translation of the one before, because the translator called it Saint Anthony's fire, and this Saint Marcoul's fire is what we now call shingles. Saint Anthony's fire is that which is from ergot poisoning from rye in Northern Europe. But perhaps the translator thought that people would be more familiar with St. Anthony's than St. Marcoul. But that's why I put that. The little footnote there talks about that. But thank you very much for that, and I hope you weren't put off by it.
We have a question in the chat.
Sure. What is the question?
Eden asks, is there something that, quote, seeing cranes as crows and silkworms as eels references?
It's probably, screwed her silly. Basically, that was my first reaction when at first blush, as it were. That's basically she's basically absolutely silly and doesn't and can't distinguish things.
And if we're thinking of some of the other Cantigas that at least I've read with you, there's a lot of innuendo.
Yeah.
And at the very least, silkworms as eels could be something.
Yeah, it's possible.
So
it's possible. Yep.
That one is up for interpretation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I don't know enough about the genre, but I was getting a bit of a vibe that these might be books of sorcery for spells to ensorcel these women.
It's possible.
So that those kinds of books sometimes included ways to make things look like other things.
Yeah, it's quite possible. So I wouldn't rule it out. Let's put it that way. So next page. The next category, the next subject for skewering: cultural mixing and sexual misalliance. The song about the dean's books would also fall under this category. Religion is a marker of legal, social, and cultural identity, and the multi-denominational communities of the 13th and 14th century Iberian Peninsula were potentially fluid and unstable, so religious differences were accentuated to govern the rules of association, to keep the differences fixed in the communities apart. Illicit sexual relations between the members of different faiths were a source of cultural anxiety that had less to do with the act of contact itself than with the potential for mixing, for losing both self-definition and group belonging. These cantigas defy the secrecy surrounding these acts by loudly mixing language, sexualities, and other forms of cultural exchange. They acknowledge the mixing that the powers that be want so badly to deny exists. And all of the ones that I could find were rather long. They tell rather long stories, and I couldn't fit one in to fit into the class. So these are summaries of these. In a cantiga by Juan Baveca, a soldadera, a performer named Mayor Garcia, to clear her debts, carries out sexual and economic transactions with a Christian squire, a Jew, and a Muslim, all in the same day. In another cantiga, she's a debtor upon whom her creditor, a Christian squire, wishes to take his due. She promises to repay him in turn with what she gains from her business with a Jew and a Moor. The poem is full of sexual and economic double entendre. When the Moor agrees to advance funds to her, he'll only accept a promissory note. The combined transactions of writing and sex produce a tralado, a receipt, a copy or reproduction of the financial contract, and of the Moor himself, a child. Keep in mind, these stories predate the published stories of the Decameron by roughly 80 years. And so this is just a book, an illustration from the Book of Games, the Libro de Ajedrez, Dados y Tablas, Book of Chess, Dice, and Boards. So, because one's a game and so is the other.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do we think Joan Baveta, is she a real person? Oh, sorry, no. Mayor Garcia.
Mayor Garcia.
Or is she like a character?
Her name comes up more than once, and it's not a common name.
Okay.
Her name comes up. There are several named performers. One really famous one that we'll be mentioning in a few moments. But this lady may have been real because her name comes up more than once, and it's not a common name. When names come up that are common, that's a nice way of not pointing someone out directly. But I think Mayor Garcia may have been real, and because she's not a virgin, a married woman, or a widow who lives honestly, she's fair game. But which is a sad state of affairs for performers, but there it is. But let me go now to the next page. Superstition was another thing that was mocked. Superstition, especially divination of bird signs and other auguries of the future. Joan Arias de Santiago mocks those who practice this divination by contrasting their morbid interest in carnivorous birds with his own preference for more edible ones. If somebody wishes to read that one. I don't want to put out poor Ana de Roma so much, so I'll do this one. Those who claim to see good or evil in birds and are renowned for divination wish for a raven on the left-hand side when they are going to enter somewhere else. I say otherwise to them, may Jesus Christ not pardon me if I don't prefer a capon to a big scavenging raven. And whoever claims to be knowledgeable about birds and bird signs always wishes for a raven on the left-hand side when he sets out to go someplace. But I ask our Lord that he give me, wherever I should go, a fattened capon for my meal, and that he give the raven to the diviner. For I know well how to tell birds apart, and I enjoy a fat duckling better than a kite, a vulture, or a viaras, which can do me neither harm nor good. As for the foolish diviner who always says that a partridge is worth more, that a raven is worth more than a partridge, may God never let him make a better choice. And that is, and the Viaras is a Galician carrion crow. And this is from a Cantiga de Santa Maria, and just it's the only one I could readily find that had a bird in it. So
we have a lady out here who is a laurel for divination, and as you know, I am a laurel for cooking. I must chide her with this.
Yes. Feel free. It's what it's there for. So, and the footnotes at the end, but at the end will show where you could find the original, where you could read the original and see the rhyme schemes for it. But let me now get to the next page. Charlatan doctors of law and of medicine. These cantigas question the credentials of practicing professionals, lawyers, medical doctors, judges, tax collectors, and attribute a crass desire for material enrichment on the part of these practitioners. It's not the professions under attack, but those who use these careers or disguises as a means of personal and professional advancement, and not out of any professional calling or talent to heal or to render justice. The poet plaintiff Esteban de Guarda jokes about how a deaf judge will not hear his pending lawsuit. Deafness is an automatic disqualification in a judge. Other jokes about the legal profession include a lawyer so adept in dialectic he can cure a man from legal death with it. Another lawyer, missing a foot, limps both physically and in his legal reasoning, crookedly. In the Tenzon, the poetic debate between Vasco Gil and King Alfonso X, the trovador comes close to humorously calling the king, his patron, a thief, or at least a magician, apparently for returning a borrowed cape in a condition different and improved from that which was lent, from in which it was lent, almost a different cape altogether. The king, as a legist as well as a learned poet, responds to these accusations. Don Vasco, I was once a young scholar and used to study law, and in the schools I used to attend, I learned from the masters the following lesson: never to take the coat of another, but if I improve it, I do a good thing, and therefore am not a thief. So, the latter half of the 13th century experienced an explosion in demand for medical lore, much of it translated from Arabic sources, thanks to Alfonso X's translation school, revived translation school, as well as from medical services. This opened the door to a flourishing trade in quackery and medical chicanery. The figure best shown up for a quack is Maestre João Nicolau, named by no less than 3 poetic detractors. Pero Garcia d'Ambroa, we heard from him, the one who lied about going on pilgrimage, showed he could dish it out as well as take it when he sang this. If somebody would like to read this one, the following slide will have more, we'll have one or two more verses. But if someone would like to read that one.
Take a crack at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know Master Niccolo, the one who didn't guarantee to cure last year, the one you call Master Hand. You see what he did for the herbs he gathered, of living patients, death, of sane patients, madness, and he makes the blind man walk straight with a cane. And I will tell you of another mastery he learned some time ago in Montpellier. Don't come to the man with a social disease without bringing as much money as you can. And he said, friend, let this be a lesson. Come give me my fee in 3 days.
There you go. And the next.
Well, I saw by your appearance that you are sick and want to be healed now, and this evil which lasts you so long. Now I really want to leave. If you're going to leave me this winter, you will no longer keep your feet in the cold. You will no longer be cured of the fever because the fever has already passed.
Yes, that's basically what he meant.
Okay. Oh, and keep going?
Yes.
And I will tell you another thing, my brother. If you want to believe my advice or want me to put my hand on you, give me how much you have and powers there are, because since I lay my hand in your wallet, you will be sheltered when you are healthy. And we've not known since ancient times such a good master, for he arrived here, who also knows how to increase his fame and price. For masteries he used, he'll pretend not to say what he never said, and makes the lame man unable to get up.
He was being comically lambasted. Basically, thaumaturgy. Thaumaturgy is the art of healing by touch, and so, but the only thaumaturgy the song says that he does is ridding people of their money. Maestre Nicolau is a particular target because he became a court physician to Alfonso X after the prior court physician, Maestre Andreu, had died. His skill seems to be less of medicine and more of language, talking to the king in time of need, of being taken into confidence, practicing the art of counsel, dialectic, and chicanery. Now, the law forbade Christians from receiving direct medical attention from Jewish physicians, but said doctors could administer treatment through Christian intermediaries. If the law favors Christian doctors in supervisory capacities, the poetry of scorn brings them down with its satires. Again, he was present when this was said, so it's basically understood that this was meant more for jocularity, not for actual. I mean, there may have been a grain of truth in it. But this was the prime example of an attack against a member of a profession to show them up as a fraud. One of the other ones that were too long to include here, somebody pointed out, this man is wearing the cap of an Eastern sage, and he has no right to wear it. So that is one of those things. So here we go. Court performers and courtesans. The other general subject matter for these poems. Remember that professional performers were of a lower social standing than troubadour poets, though some joglares wrote their own verse. Female performers, joglaresas, also called soldadeiras because they were paid in soldos, a unit of currency, for performances that included singing, playing musical instruments, and dancing. They had the reputation of being available for sex. The mocking cantigas of the reputations of these performers likely reflect the professional reality of these women. Dispensing of sexual favors was part of the job description. Then again, the sexual mores among performing artists of either gender have never been strict. And this image is a detail from the Cancionero de Ayuda, an unfinished songbook from a cantiga de amor. But you'll see there's a dancer here, and these illustrations are the only illustrations you'll see in songs like this, of a noble, a musician, and a dancer. Some include dancers, some don't. And she looks like she's holding clackers, noisemakers of some kind, precursors to the castanets. So the above short piece by Juan Vázquez de Talavera is about Maria Pérez, a very famous performer, soldadera. She also is known by Maria Pérez de Valteira. And so the known in translation song about how to enjoy a dancer is a case in point. If somebody wants to read this one. Well, if no one wishes, well, it's basically, if you're a gentleman planning to see Maria Perez take some money, or you're not going to get very far. If you're going to the evening dance of Maria Perez, have something in hand, or you're not going to get very far. If after the show you want to converse with Maria Perez, take a full purse, or you're not going to get very far. Some joglares wrote their own pieces, were troubadours in all but name, but their social standing kept them out of that club, so they were fair game for attack via cantigas as well from fellow joglares, from fellow performers. And so now we're going to have the two general categories of these songs. Cantigas de Escarino, double meanings artfully presented. These songs present their invective with covered, coded, double meaning words, so they would not be understood directly. The double entendre was the point. The cleverer the double entendre, the more prized the poem was, and the more esteemed was the poet's reputation. It's plausible to assume that these poems were performed accompanied by gestures, subtle or not. I don't know if people saw that, but I hope you got the point. So the next thing, the song about a master woodwright, that was one written by Alfonso X, as he wrote that Cantigas sometimes targeted specific people by name. Alfonso X, as prince and as king, wrote roughly 45 cantigas profanas. Maria Perez, and we've already met her, Partera, was a famous soldadera, the subject of many poems. Alfonso X took an innocuous meeting between her and a woodwright named Juan Rodriguez, who was measuring timber for her house, and turned it into talk of the woodwright's personal attributes. Rodriguez brags about how exact his timber's dimensions are. He mentions other courtesans in his clientele who are satisfied with his handiwork. Alfonso wasn't making fun of Partera. He was implying that the woodwright was bragging about possessing more material than he had. And she was doing very well for herself. She was able to buy her own house. So here is, if somebody wants to read this one. Anyone wishes to read this one?
I'll do it if nobody else wants to. I've read this one.
Mm-hmm.
Johan Rodriguez went to Baltierra's measure to take Baltierra's measure for her to receive his stud, and he said, "If you want to do well, you have to get an exact measure, neither more nor less in any way." And he said, "This is the right stud, and in addition, I don't give it only to you, and I have to bring it in straight and fully. It has to be of such right length to fit between the stairs' legs. To great Moniz, I have already given another great one, and she received its measure without displeasure. And Maria Reis was another who did the same, and Alvela, who strolls in Portugal, and they have already taken it in the mountains." And he said, "This is the measure of Spain, not that of Lombardy or Germany, and although it's thick, don't be troubled. A small battering ram has no value. That I know well, being well endowed."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Alfonso was having a little fun at this gentleman's expense. The second one is a song about a lost crusade or pilgrimage. And again, we have Maria Perez. She went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, it is said, made it without incident, and received indulgences, pardons for her sins. According to the trovador Pero da Ponte, she lost her indulgences on her way home because she did not keep her maeta, her suitcase or trunk, locked. With clear innuendo, da Ponte insinuates that she plied her trade all the way home. And this one I'll read. On her return from the Holy Land, Maria Perez, our crusadress, carried so many indulgences that she couldn't possibly sink, but they were filched along the way, so not a single one remained. Indulgences are a precious thing to be kept under lock and key, but she didn't have a decent box with a lock in which to keep them, for ever since the lock was broken, her box has been left open. How can a box like that be safe in lodgings full of lusty fellows who are sure to rifle through it? In every place where they abound, there's no indulgence that won't be found. They'll turn the hospice upside down. There's one more thing I have to say. Those indulgences obtained by fraud deserved to be taken away. The next one is going to be disturbing. I will give fair warning ahead of time. The double entendre here may be disturbing. Various trovadores have mocked the activities of one Fernando or Fernam Diaz, about whom nothing is known except what is found in a few cantigas that mention his name. As sheriff, he would have been responsible for keeping law and order, settling legal disputes, and looking out for the king's interests, which may be at odds with the interests of the nobility, which may be the reason why this song was written in the first place. It may have been written by someone who was retained by someone who was at odds with the king. The double entendre is found in line 1 in 2 of the 3 stanzas. The phrase vai sobre él can mean either he goes after him or he gets on top of him. The phrase fez sobre él, to work him over, in the 3rd stanza is equally ambiguous. The original Galician Portuguese lyric may be ambiguous. The following English translation is somewhat less so. And I leave it to the group. Do you wish for this one to be read? These are the 3 stanzas. Do you wish it to be read or not? So if I guess I can't see the chat, so if Tellery could tell me what the consensus is, whether people wish to have this read or not.
No one has put anything in the chat.
Because it is a little disturbing. In that time and place, the poem is implying and mocking Fernando Diaz's sexual proclivities. Our own sensibilities would be scorning him for abusing his power through what can only be described as rape. So we can go past it, but at least this was here to show that this was there. It was talked about. And again, the reason why this may have been written in the first place would be that perhaps some nobleman had issues with the king and were getting back at him through this verse. So through his servant with this verse. So I will continue then. And this takes us right to the Cantigas de Maldizer, of bad talk, the direct curse. This poetic invective pulls no punches, and whether someone is called out by name or not, these verses are direct. The words mean exactly what they are supposed to, what they signify. In 1264, Sultan Mohammed I of Granada waged a border war with Alfonso X, who forced him to sign a truce at Vega in 1265. Alfonso won and forced the Sultan to sign a truce at Vega a year later. Alfonso wrote more than one cantiga against vassals who had pledged to take part in that conflict, had taken the king's coin to raise an army, but didn't show up, or brought a weak host and pocketed the difference, or left early. And here's the exception. It said that he performed this piece and others like it. Himself, he didn't bother to have a performer do it. He did it himself in the presence of those whom he knew had behaved unchivalrously, to shame them and thus avoid having to hang them. So I would like someone to read this one, please.
I can do it.
All right.
He who crossed the mountain range and did not want to serve on the plain, is he the one, when war is engaged, who's bragging? Since he equivocates so much now, let him be damned. He who received the money and did not bring the knights, so as not to be among the first in the fight, he's bragging now? Since he's bringing up the rear, let him be damned. He who received a great wage and never rode, so as not to go to Granada, is he bragging now? Whether he's rich or has a strong band, let him be damned. He who brought into a field a little gold and a lot of breadcrumbs, so as not to enter the town of Vega, is he bragging now? Well, since he's softer than butter, let him be damned.
Thank you. Thank you. So imagine being at a victory celebration at the end of the battle or at the end of the war, and having engaged in that behavior, watching the king stand up and sing this, and then listening to everybody else join in on the chorus once they figured out what the refrain was, and having to keep a straight face and not having to keep a straight face. Just imagine that. The message was delivered. I know what you did. Do that again, and there will be no songs. So, and he wrote more than one of these. I found 3, but this was the shortest of them. There were others that went 15 stanzas, and they were quite specific. They didn't mention the person by name, but they mentioned things so specific that everybody must have known. Everybody must have known who this person was. And that person got thoroughly wrung out and hung up to dry. So once this happened, every troubadour who was either present or heard about it picked up the theme and ran with it. Oh, hang on. This was written by someone else, song about a nobleman sent to fight the Moors, because Portugal was allied with Spain during these wars. This cantiga was composed by the trovador Afonso Mendes de Besteiros. In the original text, a name is mentioned, Foao or Joao. It's a common name, a good way to call someone out without naming names. So Sir You Know Who or Lord What's His Name is an accurate translation. I'll do this one. Sir You Know Who is known to get rattled. All I know is how he acted in battle. Seeing the cavalry, like a bull when stabbed, he shook his fur, turned in his tracks, lifted his tail, and hied straight back to Portugal. Sir You Know Who is known to panic. All I know is how he acted in combat. Seeing the cavalry, like a heifer calf, he shook his fur, turned in his tracks, lifted his tail, and hied straight back to Portugal. Sir You Know Who is known as a weakling. All I know is what he did on the field. Like seeing the cavalry, like a dog unleashed, he shook his fur, turned in his tracks, lifted his tail, and hied straight back to Portugal. I mean, they picked this theme and ran with it. So, now, song about an ugly maid who farts. Alfonso was said to have written a parody of a love song in his younger days. So, of course, one of the few of these such songs where the music survives had to be about an ugly maid who farts. And so I'm going to play it. And I mean, the other two stanzas will be in the next page, but this is He wrote this when he was younger. It was a parody of a love song. And here goes.
Hold on, Eden is not getting the sound.
Oh.
Is anybody else want to chime in on the chat if you can hear this or not?
I mean, I was supposed to share the sound.
I'm hearing it. Isabel can hear it.
Okay.
Lana can hear it.
Okay.
Alright, sorry, Eden.
I mean, I can send him the link to the YouTube where I got this from later when this is over. There's a lot of lead up here. All right. And there was a racist overtone there as well, for which I apologize. So, but these were the other verses. I don't want an ugly maid like a hairy dog who farts outside my door nor makes like the roo. I don't want an ugly maid who has white hair who farts outside my door or makes like camels. I don't want an ugly maid old with bad skin color who farts outside my door nor leaves a worse present there. So he covers every base. A bustard bird smells, the rue plant at certain points in its life cycle smells, camels smell, and he's saying this ugly person has just left a present outside his door as well. So this was performed by Paul Hillier and the Theater of Voices. This cantiga has been attributed to Alfonso X in that YouTube video and was included in an anthology of his profane works in 2010. It was also attributed to King Dinis of Portugal in a CD from the late 1990s and to the troubadour Martin Coras in the Theatre of Voices in the Theatre of Voices CD. However, a Portuguese university webpage devoted to Galician Portuguese troubadour Cantigas lists Alfonso X as its author and cites the CD melody, the melody in the CD. The same webpage cites the CD in what we just heard as a contrafact from another song. So let me now get to the next page. The poetic record and sources of material for these poetic disses and battles. The cantigas were first circulated on loose sheets or scrolls for the benefit of the performers who performed them. Individual songbooks were made for the cantigas and the tensones, the poetic debates, of King Alfonso of Castilla and King Dinis of Portugal, and a few other noted trovadores, two of which survived in copies. The Cancioneiro da Biblioteca Nacional in Portugal's National Library and the Cancioneiro da Vaticana in the Vatican Library were both copied in the early 16th century from an older, now lost Cancioneiro at the behest of the Italian humanist Angelo Colocci. No space was left for the musical notations, unfortunately, which is why we have no confirmable music for this stuff. The Vatican Songbook was discovered in 1840 and contains some 1,200 cantigas, which will of different genres. The Songbook in Portugal's National Library was discovered in 1878 and has 1,560 cantigas, which include this genre of the songs of scorn and ridicule. There are other folios and fragments of secular cantigas. The Vindel parchment in 1913 or 14 contains 7 cantigas by Martin Coras, with music for all but the 6th, but most of those are love songs. The Schar parchment in 1990, found in 1990, contains fragments with musical notations for 7 cantigas de amor by King Dinis of Portugal. Now, the Cancioneiro de Ajuda is important here because it was discovered around 1800 and now is in the Ajuda Palace Library in Lisbon. Dates from the end of the 13th century. It's an unfinished songbook. Space was left for musical notation below the first stanza of each song, but the notes were never inscribed. It contains 310 cantigas, almost all of them cantigas de amor, but did not name the authors. However, 246 of those are found in one or both of the other cancioneiros, so that way that they could be identified. These were the extent of the illuminations in that cancioneiro. They only show the musicians, the dancers performing, and the noblemen they're performing for. But it gives an idea of how the other original songbooks would have presented their works. And these collections encompass all the Iberian troubadour genres, from the cantigas de amigo, cantigas de amor, cantigas moral, the tenson, and the cantigas de Escarino and Maldizer. The settings for these duels or contests. The university was the likely origin of the poetic duels or contests. They were also performed during breaks in military campaigns, especially after a victory, and also during courts, royal and otherwise, most likely during carnival season. There is no formal record of the poetic duels themselves. The poetic debate, or tenson, gives a hint of what they would entail, particularly this one co-authored by Alfonso X and the trovador Garcia Perez. This debate seems to have taken place while on a break during a military campaign, perhaps the conquest of Cadiz in 1261. So the first verse is made by the person addressing the first and third verse are made by the person addressing the king. The second and fourth verse are made by are the answer made by the king. Would someone like to read the first and the third verse, and I could respond as the king? If anyone would like to read the first verse, and then I'll respond, and then the other person could read the third verse, and I could respond.
I can do it.
All right.
I want to ask the king a question again, who is usually well and handsomely dressed. Why did he bring an old brown coat of fine fabric? And we want to laugh, I and Gonzalo Martin, who is a very handsome man by my faith, and we want to censure him again for it.
Garcia Perez, you can censure well. It was never truly a mistake for me to want to bring an old brown coat to court, not even to cover myself with it, but I will justify it well. I never paid for it at court, but these wars make us stand out. And so you'll see the little note. The other meaning besides stand out for bulir is to swell or to seethe or to boil or to bulge, which gives a whole new meaning to the old brown coat that Alfonso X never paid for at court. If you want to resume your debate, please.
Sure. Sir, you have very well justified the brown coat that I saw you bring, and since you want to leave it, if you believe me, you will do this. Order immediately and without hesitation that it will be thrown swiftly onto a dunghill, for I have never seen a worse coat.
Garcia Perez, you do not know how to give good advice, from what I heard, since you advised me to toss this coat in such a place. Because if I did, it would go badly for me, and I think it is much better to give it to a peasant soldier here. So he's basically saying, don't harsh my mellow. But so this was a very comical interlude that happened during a victory, during a campaign.
Maestra, we are at about 4:37.
Oh, all right. Okay. So what we will do then, I will skip the notable trovador. So we're at 4:37. So we're just at the hour mark. These were notable trovadors and trovador and joglar poets. I will go so far as to point out Pero Garcia d'Ambroa, because the poor guy had been skewered for lying about going on pilgrimage, but he gave as good as he got when he talked about Maestro Nicolau. I just wanted to point out that he was a joglar from Galicia and attached to the court of Alfonso X. He composed his 15 known cantigas there. He was ridiculed for lying about going on pilgrimage, but he finally got over his fear of long sea voyages, went to the Holy Land, and died there in 1257 or 1258. God rest his soul. So we're a little bit over the the first half of the course. If people want to take a 5-minute bio break, then we can talk about composing cantigas or canzones, or just having a general discussion. So if you want to take a 5-minute bio break, please feel free to do so. What time is it now? It is now it's 4:38. Oh, now it's 4:39. So we can come back at 4:44. We can come back at 4:44 if you so wish.